Good afternoon, and welcome to the Lessons of Vietnam show, where we try to tell everything that's about the truth of the Vietnam War. And we're going to be going over a couple of subjects today. I hope you enjoy them. Some of them are very interesting with going on. You'll see the show. It's basically called "I Didn't Know That," and we can have that first slide, Amnon. There we go. So we can make sure everybody gets their credit. I just realized after all this using this thing that I can't spell. Brought to you on the second Monday of each month at 3 p.m., which you know because you're here. The Lessons of Vietnam, Dispelling the Myths and Lies and Half-Truths and Misunderstandings. I am your host, Bill Dixon, Vietnam 6768. I was with headquarters company, 159 Engineer Group, 20th Engineer Brigade, Long Bend Post. And we're brought to you by the courtesy of Nissan Communications. Without Nissan Communications and Amnon getting us going, we wouldn't be on the air. If you have any comments or suggestions about the show, how about dropping me an email? It's Dixon, D-I-X-O-N, Bill80 at yahoo.com. If you have any comments during the show, you can call in at 919-518-9773 or come in on Skype at Computers 2K Voice. Either one, and make comments, ask questions, or whatever. But in the meantime, we're going to keep right on moving. This is a tough time of year for a lot of veterans and their families. Sometimes we have lost a loved one between now and the last Christmas, and it was close to Christmas, and it's hard to have all the memories and all the people outside being cheerful and so forth. If you're a veteran or know a veteran that's having a crisis, having a hard time, uh, encourage them to go online or go to the phone call at 1-800-273-8255 and press 1. Pressing 1 gives you another veteran on the other line, and talk to somebody. Sometimes it's just good to talk to somebody who will listen and doesn't have an opinion, just sit there and listen. But if you're a veteran or know a veteran, I encourage you to reach out to somebody there ready to help you. Now let's get right on into the show. I want to, how about a mine sniffing rat received a gold medal for sniffing mines in Cambodia? Now, if you were in Vietnam, you remember the rats there. They sniff about everything, as big as they were, but I did not know at the time that, well, they wanted at the time, but they have rats now that go out and sniff for landmines. There's so many landmines scattered all over Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam now. So they've got trained rats, but this one got a gold medal for doing it. Okay. Phnom Penh, Cambodia. After 5 years of sniffing out landmines and unexploded ordnances in Cambodia, Magawa is retiring. The African giant poached, is it poached or pouched? I guess it's giant pouched rat has been the most successful rodent trained and overseen by a Belgian nonprofit, APOPO, to find landmines and alert his human handlers so the explosives can be safely removed. Last year, Magawa won a British charity's top civilian award for animal bravery. An honor so far exclusive reserved for dogs. Although still in good health, he has reached a retirement age and is clearly starting to slow down. Apopo said, "It's time." Magawa has cleared more than 141,000 square meters, 1.5 million square feet of land, the equivalent of some 20 soccer fields, sniffing out 71 landmines and 38 items of unexploded ordnances, according to APOPO again. That's a lot of sniffing. And you see how they're doing it. They string out a grid, and the rat is hooked to a harness and can run up and down the grid. And looks like he's sniffing a grenade right there. APO works with programs in Angola, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique to clear millions of mines left behind from wars and conflict. More than 60 million people in 59 countries continue to be threatened by landmines and unexploded ordnances in 2018. Landmines and other remnants of war killed or injured 6,897 people, the group said. I know that's a big problem with in Vietnam. And you see a young lady there who's obviously lost a leg. Rats like magua have an acute sense of smell and are trained to differentiate between random scrap metal and explosive chemicals. At 2.7 pounds, magua is a light enough to not to trigger the bombs, even when they step directly on them. And they do better than the people that are looking for them. But you can see some of the landmines there. They have been dug up thanks to the rats. Now, going from rats to Bob Hope. From World War II to Desert Storm, he entertained the troops. Bob Hope entertained troops on USO tours from 1941 to 1991, 50 years of laughter and travel from World War II to Vietnam to Desert Storm. Bob Hope was there for our nation's troops. I remember seeing the Bob Hope show at Long Bend, 1967. Raquel Welch was there, and there looked like it was about 100,000 people there because there was a lot of people there, hanging from poles and everything else. Okay, that's his signature patient there on the cartoon, and his signature song was "Thanks for the Memories." Bob Hope brought his variety show to military camps and war zones to entertain troops with song, dance, comedy, attractive women, and people in the news. He discovered early on that audiences appreciated jokes about their locale and local elite, like the generals and so forth. The strategy worked especially well when he teased soldiers about their bases and skewed their officers. Hope believed he gained more from the experience than Hope believed he gained more from the experience than he gave. I hate war with all my guts, Hope told the crowd in 1971, but I admire the guys with guts enough to fight them when they have to be fought. Kind of funny, and you're watching Bob Hope on the stage, and back a little bit, they've got these huge cue cards. I guess he does so many shows, he don't even know where he was at, but he has to read his jokes off the cue card. So you're really quick, you can turn around and see what the joke's going to be. On his last morning in office, President Lyndon B. Johnson, 1908 to 1973, awarded Presidential Medals of Freedom to 20 individuals, including Bob Hope. Bob Hope's citation noted that with his gift of joy to all Americans, people, he has written his name large in the history of our time, and that's the medal. It was quite an experience to go see Bob Hope, but 50 years of traveling, I didn't spend any time with his family much that way. Let's see. Bob Hope and his troop entertained troops at Long Bend Post. You can see guys hanging from the pole there. That was the amphitheater there. And let's see. I don't know what year that was, but I don't see me in there. Well, there are a couple other people. Uh, that was enough about Bob Hope and traveling around. I know there's a Vietnam vet. I appreciate him being there, and most other veterans that I got the chance to see him. Uh, the B-52, every time we think about bombing and so forth, we think of the B-52. But, if you go back and look at it, the B-52 Stratofortress is older than most of the pilots who fly it. They're planning on getting 100 years out of the B-52. This is an article by Mike Case. The B-52 is a plane that the Air Force just can't say goodbye to. With a long-range, supersonic, jet-powered strategic bomber with a 185-foot wingspan. That's the height of the Leaning Tower of a pizza. The first Boeing B-52 became operational on June 29, 1955, at Castle Air Force Base in California, where they were assigned to the 93rd Bombardment Wing. 1952 to today. B-52s have played a key role from the Cold War and the Vietnam War to Desert Storm and the global war on terror. That sucker. That is a lot of wing right there. The official name of the B-52 is Stratofortress, however known more popular as Buff or Big Ugly Fat, and you can fill in the blanks there. but there it is in the air. Air Force has recently decided to extend the service life of the B-52 through the 2040s. At that point, some of the B-52's airframes will be approaching an incredible 90 years old, making the planes considerably older than anyone flying them. I would think so at 90, it would probably be more, but that's an awesome airplane. It's powered by 8 Pratt& and Whitney turbofan jet engines, the only jet in active service with 8 engines. Only jet and with 8 engines has a unrefueled range of 8,800 miles and can carry a 70,000-pound payload without being refueled. 8,800 miles. The youngest B-52 still in action service are about 58 years old. Those are the H models, and the last of which was delivered to the Air Force in 1962. Compare this to the fact that almost 39% of men and women serving the Air Force are less than 26 years old. But they seem to be holding up well. In 2010, then Lieutenant Daniel Welch became the third generation of his family to become a B-52 aviator. His father, retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Don Welch, was a B-52 flight officer, as was his grandfather, retired Air Force Colonel Don Sprague, who flew combat missions in Vietnam, where he earned the Distinguished Flying Cross. So there's 3 generations. Be interesting, they may have 4 generations. I have a friend of mine that flew B-52s, and I talked about how small the windows were going. He said it didn't make any difference if you could see it. It was too late to do anything but hit it anyway. In 1972, the last enemy airplane shot down in Vietnam War by a bomber's defensive weaponry was recorded by a B-52 tail gunner over Vietnam. And I didn't realize that was the last plane to be shot down like that from bomber was from tail gunner there. Due to their changing tactics and technology, the gunner position would be eliminated in 1991. No longer have the tail gunner. During Operation Chrome Dome, between the years of 1961 and 1968, the Strategic Air Command kept B-52s armed with nuclear weapons airborne 24 hours a day in case of a new attack by the Soviet Union. They just flew and around and around and around, being ready. Fortunately, these weapons were never used. However, these missions were not without hazard. Plutonium leaks, 24-hour-long flight missions, accidental crashes, and dangerous weather conditions were all part of the job of flying a B-52 during Operation Chrome Dome. I don't know how many of you know this, but there's an atomic bomb somewhere off the coast of North Carolina that was dropped and never been found. So it's just a little extra fact there. There's no extra charge for that. The aircraft's flexibility was evident in Operation Desert Storm and again during Operation Allied Forces. B-52 struck wide area troop concentrations, fixed installations, and bunkers, and decimated the morale of Iraqi's Republican Guard on September 2nd to the 3rd, 1996. 2 B-52Hs struck Baghdad power stations and communication facilities with 13 AGM 86C. Now, somebody out there going to have to tell me what that means. It sounds like that's the size of the bombs and so forth. Conventional air-launched cruise missiles of Qasams as part of Operation Desert Strike. At that time, this was the longest distance flown for a combat mission involving a 34-hour, 16,000 statute mile round trip from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. 34 hours flying from Louisiana over to Baghdad, dropping the bombs and coming home. 16,000 miles. In 2001, the B-52s contributed to the success of Operation Enduring Freedom, providing the ability to loiter high above the battlefield and provide close air support through the use of precision-guided munitions. The B-52s also played a role in Operation Iraqi Freedom by launching approximately 100 missiles during a night mission, March 21st, 2003. In 2016, the B-52s returned to Central Command air responsibility for the first time in a decade. B-52s flew approximately 1,800 combat sorties against ISIS forces in Syria and Iraq, contributing to the decline of ISIS in the region. And you have not, if you're too young to know who this is James Stewart. In 1966, actor and World War II veteran Air Force Reserve Brigadier General Jimmy Stewart, on a USA, also on a USA tour, a veteran, did a lot of traveling around, flew his final combat mission on board a B-52 over Vietnam. And it's kind of funny. He made a movie, Strategic Air Command, about the plane, the B-52s flying all over the country, around and around, just in case of nuclear war. And there's, you see, that's the uh, cover sheet for the movie. Okay. Now we'll get on to something a little bit different here. The indigenous people of Vietnam's Central Highlands. And it's a bigger area than I thought it was. What is often forgotten is that Vietnam is a diverse place made up of many groups of people. Vietnam has 54 ethnic groups. And we have a tendency to throw everybody under the same umbrella, and it's not. As we're going to be going along, you'll find that one of the peoples there are the Montagnards, the mountain people, and we're going to be showing you a little bit. But you can see the South Vietnam, under the word Vietnam, just about where I guess where it's Laos picture right there. It says Laos is about where the North and South Vietnam line was. No, it was down there. Okay, but so that's the Central Highlands is what we're talking about. It starts to get mountainy right in that area. So let's see what we got. That's some of the views of it. As you can see, the beautiful mountains, the waterfalls there, and there's a Montagnard home dug into the mountains. The Central Highlands of Vietnam has varied and beautiful landscape. As you can see there, some of it's mountainy, some of it's flat, farmland, and so forth. The indigenous people of Vietnam's Central Highlands are called Montagnards, mountaineers, a name given them by the French. They're called Yards by the Americans who fought with them in the Second Indochina War. They were some of the best allies we have ever had. They really worked with the special forces and that kind. They are called Moi, or savages, by the Vietnamese. They call themselves Dager, a name coined by those in the forest in the forest fighting for their freedom. And you can see they build all their houses up. The picture to your left there, the guy's drinking through a straw. They make a rice wine, and you drink it through a straw and it's really good, but you don't really know how good it is until you take a couple sips and it hits you. And there's one of the ladies of the Montagnard. When the Americans first got there, they were basically like the American Indians. The women were topless, the men wore loincloths. And the Vietnamese always hated them and did not want the Americans to give them weapons and so forth. The French, who were the first to colonize the Central Highlands from 1895 to 1954, called them Montagnards, which means mountaineers. Because over the centuries, the Montagnards were driven from their fertile coastal area to the mountains of Southeast Asia by invading Cham and Vietnamese people. Their ancestors thus settled in the Central Highland Mountains. So basically, the Montagnards were not always in the mountains. They were also in the lowlands and so forth. To their credit, the French recognized their rights to these lands on which they were born, and their ancestors had occupied for thousands of years. France defined their borders and formalized their right to their own nation in 1946. They called this land the Montagnard country of South Indochina, giving them high hopes of continuing their development among the other free nations of this earth as a peaceful agricultural society of hunters and farmers. They have been promised their own country for so many years by so many different people. That's some of the Montagnards there again, as you can see, with their cows. And the Vietnamese who invaded coastal areas and took over the colonization of the lands after the French left in 1955 called them Moi, which means savages. Their desire to exploit the Montagnards country began with the attempt to dehumanize them as the custom of nations who declare war on their neighbors. As we said, Japs, as we did the American Indians. By this process, their soldiers might feel justified to slaughter them like animals, take their land and property, and deprive them of the human rights which many citizens of the world take for granted. In this way, they suffered a fate similar to the Native Americans, Australian Aboriginals, African Bushmen, and other original inhabitants subject to invasion and exploitation by outsiders. Throughout history, you can see the young boys there lighting their cigarettes. Throughout history, the cultural animosity between the Montagnards people and the modern world has taken a heavy toll. But nothing has affected them more brutally than the last 50 years of war by outsiders who view the highlands as a little more than an invaluable resource of hidden supply lines and nearly impregnable battlefield sanctuaries. It was after these wars that the Vietnamese invaders began to extensively forced assimilation policies and genocide practices against the Montagnard people. And the communists take over. The Dagger people, who were recruited and attacked by both sides of the Viet Minh and the French in the First Indochina War, later both North and South Vietnam governments who would do the same in the Second Vietnam War, which is the American War. This results crossfire killed hundreds of thousands of them in the period since the war has been worse. The war's victors, the communists, are cultural enemies of the Dagger and have no interest in indigenous people. They have publicly stated their intentions to destroy the culture and continue to commit genocide against them. The culture is suppressed, diluted, and the communist Vietnamese desire to kill off and erase them as a race of people. Now, when you first were going in to recruit them, the Vietnamese people did not want us to recruit them to start with. They did not want the Americans to give the Montagnards weapons because the Vietnamese people, even the South Vietnamese people, had treated them so bad and taken their land and so forth away. They were afraid of what would happen to them. But the United States went in and worked with the Montagnards, which is another story in itself. Okay. The Viet Minh defeated the French in Vietnam War. Vietnam was divided at the 17th parallel. Ho Chi Minh assumed leadership in the North, and Bao Dai, who was the king, assumed leadership in the South. In the general election of 1955, Diem was elected the first president of the Republic of South Vietnam. Diem then merged the Central Highlands illegally into South Vietnam by force. The Diem regime committed this seizure unopposed by other governments. Diem's government also classified the Dagger people as ethnic minorities in their own homeland in order to deprive them of human rights and rights to their land. Further, they would begin to annihilate the Montagnard people. You see there the picture of Diem, anti-communist, devout Catholic, corrupt and suppressed opposition. Prevented 1956 Democratic elections, and he was supported by the United States up until the time they turned their heads so he could be assassinated. Genocide, the deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group, a campaign of genocide. Diem launched a land development program that called for the resettling of 850,000 Vietnamese refugees from the north into the heart of Dagger homeland. The Montagnards were pushed off the land. Later, many of these Vietnamese became Viet Cong forces that fought against the U.S. armed forces and murdered innocent Dagger people. In other words, there was given a time when the line was drawn that people could either come north or go south, and a lot of people who went south were actually the communist people. So when they actually started the war, they already had the communist people there and in the Highlands. Diem's goal was to assimilate the Dagger into Vietnamese cultural sphere by eliminating their tribal courts, prohibiting their language from school, expropriating their land, and denying them their ethnic identity. They used the word assimilation to camouflage the word genocide. Sounds like what we did to the American Indians. They couldn't be taught to teach English. And you can see how the tribes of the Montagnard people were all over Vietnam. Each color there is a different tribe. The government of the United States provided the money for this project, which later became widely recognized as a failure and a cultural devastating policy. From the point of view of the Daga people, Diem's forces and the Viet Cong created two competing forces, which resulted in a mutually reinforced plan of genocide towards the Daga people. In itself, defense, the Daga people formed the Baharaka movement, a combination of the key words of Bahanar, Jare, and Raid, and Kaho. Those are some of the tribes to resist forced assimilation to stop the genocide policy of them. The goal of this movement was to make the Montagnards a separate nation with its own administration and army. Under American support and military assistance, Diem crushed the Baha movement and murdered its people. All of its leaders were imprisoned, including Babam Imyo and Wathan Iban and Jiu Iban, Neluit, and many others. The U.S. government failed to intervene and stop Diem's government from destroying the people, their villages, and their culture and their homelands. The Maharaja freedom fighters continued to struggle as a guerrilla movement, underground. Many others were deceived by the promises of Ho Chi Minh into aligning themselves with his cause. The leaders of North Vietnam, including Ho Chi Minh, had promised to return the Daga land to its people. At this time, the leaders of the Daga movement in the jungle, such as Nadir, Nafam, and the other two of those listed, and many others had no choice but to accept the offer of Ho Chi Minh. Therefore, during the Second Indochina War, Ho Chi Minh had two fronts, the Montagnard front and the Vietnamese front. Ho Chi Minh deceptively used the front for the liberation of Central Highlands to cheat and to force Daga people to follow him against the South Vietnamese. However, despite Ho Chi Minh's promises, after their victory in 1975, the Soviet Republic of Vietnam expropriated the Central Highlands, placing all governance of these Daga homelands under their direct control and authority, instead of giving the lands back to the Montagnard people as they had promised. The Daga people were denied their right to sovereignty and were instead brutally oppressed by Hanoi government. After the victory, most of the Daga leaders who were with Ho Chi Minh since the First and Second Indochina War were sent home for retirement. The reason given was because Montagnard leaders did not have the ability to work. The truth is that the government did not want their leaders to claim what Ho Chi Minh had promised them about self-determination and self-rule of the homelands. Respected to the Hmongs in the United States Central Agency, CIA, recruited the Daga people for a counterinsurgency war against the Viet Cong. Armed, trained, and paid by the United States, the Daga people were injected into the middle of the conflict between the Viet Cong and the armies of both South and North Vietnam. Again, the Daga people were promised that they would regain their autonomous state, which had been granted by the French, the first colonizers of the Montagnard homeland. After the French left Indochina in 1954, most of Montagnard's younger people did not want to join the South Vietnamese army. Further, the Diem government had imprisoned their leaders and destroyed the movement for freedom. And as you can see where they've gone in and destroyed some of the Montagnard villages and homes and so forth there. However, the Central Highlands was an important strategic location during the Vietnam War. The military planning of both sides agreed that he who gained the Central Highlands would win the war. Therefore, most of the big battles took place in the Central Highlands, and in turn, over 200,000 Montagnard people were killed and 85% of their villages were destroyed during the war. On September 20th, 1964, the Daga people launched a military resistance called Fulro, United Front for the Liberation of Oppressed Races, and you can see their flag there, led by Raid General Abam Inyo, who was headquartered in Cambodia for security reasons. Mr. Inuit was the first to use their word Daga to describe the name of people at the Conference of Indochina People of Phnom Penh, Cambodia in 1965. South Vietnamese collapse began with the rout of its defenses in the highlands. If you have listened to the show or read some history, you'll understand that once they got the highlands and it just was full scale. The war ended on May 1st with the victory of the North Vietnamese, and the Daga people suffered the consequences. Many of the Daga leaders and people were executed because the new government of Vietnam accused us of being the eyes and ears of the U.S. armed forces during the war, and also members of the Full Road organization. They convicted them as traitors because the Montagnards were fighting for the U.S. They cannot, however, be traitors against the Hanoi government when firstly they are not Vietnamese people. Even today, there are still untold numbers of Daga people are still in prison for this reason. In addition, those who are lucky enough to be released die, usually within a year under mysterious circumstances. It is well known that when a Daga is released from prison, it's the same as a death sentence. You see some of the pictures of the prison there. After the end of the war, the Montagnard political and religious leadership, civil service, former military personnel, and students were mercifully jailed, confined to re-education camps, tortured, and executed. Daga women have been raped and forced into prostitution to soldiers of the Social Republic of Vietnam. The public health system has been allowed to deteriorate and generally unavailable for Daga families. Tribal law courts have been replaced by harsh systems of justice, which is biased against the Daga people. The Social Republic of Vietnam has closed all churches and accused those Dagas Christians of working for the CIA. Their children are excluded from higher education, and no schools are provided in areas far from the cities. Daga languages are prohibited in school. Even their graveyards have been desecrated and looted. Private property and lands have been confiscated and distributed to ethnic Vietnamese. Forced labor and slavery have been imposed on all Daga people, regardless of age or gender. The Daga people have been forcibly evicted from their farmlands and moved to barren soil, which is poor and unsuitable for cultivation. They have been forced to work as slave laborers during the establishment of collective farms, which were then turned over to ethnic Vietnamese. If you look at the picture there, you see those houses are built on the ground. They're not up on stilts. That's where the thousands and thousands of Vietnamese have brought in to resettle in the lower highlands, forcing the Daga people out down to the not good land. Since the war, the Central Highlands had been virtually closed to foreigners. However, reports now indicate that only a few 100,000 of the Montagnard people still remain. Those remnants survive there today, trapped by geography and politics in a culture killing field, where unless the rest of the world intercedes, the Montagnard people are sure to be buried forever. Those kids. The current Vietnamese government is practicing cultural genocide by breaking up the extended families and placing all the elders in so-called retirement villages, where they have little or no means of support or access to medicine. Daga farmlands have been taken away, and the people are allowed only a tiny piece of land on which to grow food. All vegetation from the jungle to the mountains is being wiped out and 1,000 times more efficiently by today's current logging than during the high points of America's Agent Orange herbicide program, which is hard to believe if you were there. That the land has been cleared out for trees. In 1976, the Ministry of Culture of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam announced they would be necessary to eradicate all outmoded customs. Changing the culture of ethnic minorities, the program was called Din Con Din Cu, which means fixed field, fixed residence. In practice, it meant forcing the indigenous people population into small, controlled areas of poor cropland, and so that large numbers of ethnic Vietnamese could be settled on the greater part of Daga lands. When the Dagas were farming, they'd farm one area for a while, and then, like we did learn to do here, was to move the crops around some. And now the ministry, which is their seal there, you see, is saying that that's your crop and you're going to plant that right there. So the Montagnards are not permitted to maintain or construct Christian churches. If they are caught participating in services, they are heavily fined. He cites information that this is coming from a man who was there. He cites information that some American officials consider those who have been affiliated with the furlough movement as terrorists and decline to process their applications for immigration. In other words, we can't let them come in the United States because they were part of the furlough movement trying to make the Decker Montagnards better. They also refuse to qualify the Montagnards for immigration, who have served America for over 5 years in the Mike Force, Kit Carson Scouts, the Cruz, and the Truong Son Cadre program. These people risk their lives in rescuing pilots and gathering intelligence that saved hundreds of Americans. For 18 years, the Social Republic of Vietnam closed the Central Highlands to all except a relative handful of visitors, and even then, the movement was carefully controlled and monitored by agents of the government. In the spring of 1993, perhaps in response to the meeting of the 11th session of the United Nations Working Group on Indigenous People, in June of that year, visitors were again permitted in the Central Highlands. Those few visitors who decided to test the government's new policy of openness were met with omnipresent signs in both Vietnamese and English that prohibited entry, which they did back during the re-education camps also. Reliable reports from the Central Highlands indicate that only a few 100,000 of Montagnard people remain. These reports also indicate that food is scarce and there is a severe lack of medical care. With grim determination, the few remnants of their ancient race cling to life, defying the murderous intent of the occupying forces on their land, defying those who are committed to the cultural genocide, in which the people and their culture are diluted by alien influences. The Montagnards are trapped in the culture killing fields of the Social Republic of Vietnam. As different tribes, the raid and different ones, they had a lot of traditions and so forth. And as you can see here, the Vietnamese communists are trying to come in and eliminate all of those, because if they can get rid of the traditions and so forth, then they're just another Vietnamese. During French colonization, the Daga people were numbered at over 3 million persons, and now the population is around 500,000. Their world has been shattered, and the very existence of their race and culture is threatened in Cambodia. The Khmer Rouge have enjoyed similar success, having executed, with his wife and children, and over 100 of his followers, and their wives and children. The Montagnards are facing literal extinction. They desperately need humanitarian aid and political support to promote their organization in the international community, to be able to save their homeland, their culture, and their people. You see some of them there with protest signs. A few survivors of these killing fields of the Social Republic of Vietnam fled into the jungles after America left Vietnam to continue to fight for the freedom and the independence of the Daga people. They fled to the jungle, saying to themselves, our good American friend, they're going to come back and help us. In 1986, 200 full-road fighters made their way to a Thai refugee camp, and eventually they resettled in North Carolina. In 1992, 400 full-road fighters and their families contacted the UN peacekeeping forces in the Monrek province of Cambodia. With no help from the outside world, they were forced to end their 17-year military struggle. They requested political asylum, handed over their weapons, and accepted resettlement in North Carolina. I know that we helped them, came here, and we helped them get food and so forth. But those people were surrounded and given a choice: either lay down their weapons or continue fighting and die. The Montagnard people have lived in the Central Highlands for thousands of years. The Vietnamese moved to 1 million persons into their lands from 1956 to 1975, and more than 10 million after 1975. We welcomed them and helped them to survive. Why did they repay our kindness with genocide? The Montagnard people fought and died for French colonialism and treated them like brothers. Why did they, in turn, give the support to the Vietnamese? Why did the French give the land away and can now repay the Montagnards with help in their greatest hour of needs. They fought and died for the Americans as loyal allies, and they also promised the Montagnards their freedom. But they left the country and the Montagnard people to be killed by both sides of the Vietnamese conflict. You see some of the soldiers there. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Kind of ring true recently. Why do the people of the world choose to protect certain races and not others? Why are the Daga people not worth saving and the European people in other countries are? Have we not proved our value? Many people are remorseful of the disappearance of the Native American culture and deeply regret the atrocities dealt to them. They say that wish they could only go back in time and change things. The Daga people of Southeast Asia cannot alone survive under the attempt of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam to exterminate them physically and spiritually. They cannot survive the occupation of their farmland, the destruction of the ecosystem, this slow and painful death sentence. The Montagnards call upon you to provide to your current allies and those nations with whom you might seek alliances in the future that you will never abandon them to total destruction. We call upon you to show the world that your allies can safely rely on your promise and they will not be doomed to extinction by giving you their trust. That's what the Montagnards are saying to the American government. The depiction of Montagnards in Apocalypse Now in Francis Coppola's 1979 film held a masterpiece. Captain Willard and a patrol boat crew ventures upriver into an ethnic minority territory where the shower of arrows rain down. In black vest and loincloths, with Filipino actors playing the role of Montagnards. If I remember correctly, that was supposed to be, it took years to do. Martin Sheen had a heart attack in the process, but the book was actually written by a South African tribe, but they made it into Vietnam and the Montagnards. Of great inspiration is a vibrant refugee community in North Carolina, home of the largest community of Montagnards outside Southeast Asia. Apocalypse Never is part of a larger project called The Past is Present. New Montagnard artists supported by the Montagnard Daga Association, a local community organization with funding from Creative Greensboro, made possible also by the Office of Arts and Culture of the City of Greensboro. So you want to see the Montagnards, go down to Asheboro and to Greensboro. We'll talk about. Okay. This is some of the people that have come over. That is a North Carolina built house up off the ground. You see some of the Montagnard people there, very sharp looking people. There's an organization called Save the Montagnard People. And what they did, and the special forces who's worked so hard and so special with the Montagnard people, got together on their own and brought a lot of the Montagnard people here and have supported them since they got here. But they bought a bunch of land around Asheboro, North Carolina, which is very similar to the Central Highlands, and that's where a lot of the Montagnards live. And they actually have a mock Montagnard village that you can visit. North Carolina homes to about 5,000 Montagnards. Half of these live in Greensboro, with the large populations of Charlotte and Raleigh. A second wave of 400 Montagnards came to the United States in late 1992. In 2002, an additional 900 resettled in the Tar Heel State. But you can go online to Save the Montagnard People, Inc.com, and get a lot more information. Okay. Human Rights Group has found that government surveillance of highland villages has increased. We're talking a little bit more about it today. I've talked to some of the Montagnards, and they're really concerned here about the treatment and the wholesale wiping out the Montagnard culture and the people. They say it's gotten much worse since the war. Has increased security measures have tightened, and repression of minority Christians has intensified. The Vietnamese government violated fundamental human rights in the course of suppressing the protests, HRW found, and these violations will continue as of March 2002. Rights abuse include arbitrary arrest, detention or interrogation of hundreds of Highlanders suspected of participating in or helping to organize the February 2001 demonstrations. Police torture of people in detention or during the interrogation, including beatings, kicking, and shocking with electric batons. Violation of the right to freedom of religion, including destruction and closure of ethnic minority Protestant churches and official pressure on Christians to abandon their religion under threat of legal action or imprisonment. Excessive use of force by security forces during the confrontation with ethnic Jari villages in Pleilau and Gilau in March of 2001. Bans on public gatherings in violation of the rights to freedom of assembly. Restrictions on travel. In some areas, authorities have required written permission to be secured in advance of any temporary absence from the village, making it difficult for farmers to go to work in the fields. Arrest and mistreatment of Highlanders who fled to Cambodia were then forcibly returned to Vietnam. In a report, repressions of Montagnards, conflicts over land and religion in Vietnam Central Highlands. HRW called on Vietnam to cease its persecution of the Montagnards and for Cambodia to continue to offer sanctuary to those fleeing across the border. Simmering discontent. A February 2001 unrest in the Central Highlands represented the convergence of multiple grievances among the Highlanders: religious repression, ethnic persecution, among the highest poverty and illiteracy rates in Vietnam, and most importantly, the struggle over increased scarce land. At the beginning of the 20th century, the population of Central Highlands of Dak Lak, Gilau, Long Dong, and Kon were around 240,000. The vast majority were indigenous ethnic minorities. The current population is now estimated at roughly 4 million, of whom only 1/4 are indigenous minorities, such as the Hong, Jari, Singh, and Ed, or Raid, and Coho. Among the Highlands, between 229 to 400,000 are thought to follow evangelical Protestants. In the early 1990s, many Montagnards became attracted to a particular type of Christianity practiced in the Highlands called the Lang Daga, or Daga Protestantism, which brings together aspirations for independence and cultural pride and evangelism. The Vietnamese government does not allow the existence of independent associations or non-governmental organizations, including church groups. For Daga Protestants, prayer and worship services provided space for Montagnard beliefs and worship not controlled by the government or authorities. We've got to hide it. Government organized resettlement schemes as well as spontaneous migration has quadrupled the population density of ethnic Vietnamese and other migrants in parts of the Highlands since 1975, creating intense pressure on land and natural resources. Lacking official land use certificates, the Highlanders have been increasingly squeezed off the land. And these people are farmers. If you don't have the land to farm, you can't feed your family. But without a ownership certificate, they can't even get that little part. At the same time, the economic base of the Highlands pushed towards coffee production over the last decade. It's been dealt a strong blow by the global plummet in coffee prices over the 2 years preceding the outbreak of unrest. In the past, many Highlanders supported themselves on at least several hectares of land per family, on which they practiced swindling agriculture, which I'm not familiar with. As lowlanders or ethnic minorities from other parts of Vietnam became to encroach on the land, or as state plantations displaced them, such practices became untenable. My grandfather had more than 5 hectares of land, an ethnic man said. The government took the land and gave only part of it to me, less than a hectare. In the past, we did shifting agriculture, moving our farm plots around. As lowlanders or ethnic minorities from other parts of Vietnam began to encroach on their land, or as state plantations displaced them, such as practice became untenable. The fallow land was part of our land. Now we just farm in one place. I have just enough land to feed my family, but nothing left over. Today, most Highlanders eke out a living by farming rice and perhaps a small home garden of coffee and peppers on less than a hectare of land, making ends meet by trading in the market or working as laborers for the growing population of ethnic Vietnamese in the region. In other words, they have to go to work for the people who are taking their land. The Highlanders' resentment over the loss of land has been compounded by the fact that they are finding themselves losing out to their new migrants in education, employment, and other economic opportunities. In other words, their children are not allowed to go to school out there. Promising autonomy, desire for independence are not new among the ethnic minorities in Central Highlands. Montagnard groups sought and obtained a promise of autonomy from the French colonial government in the 1940s, as well as the government of both North and South Vietnam during the American War. Where the various promises to create such an autonomous zone were largely token gestures gained the laurels of the Montagnards, the idea has garnered enthusiastic support from the indigenous inhabitants of the Highlands who have long felt persecuted, exploited, and alienated from the central government. Okay. More than 160 Highlanders attempted to flee to Cambodia at the time, were arrested and deported back to Vietnam. While many of the women subsequently returned to their villages, the whereabouts of some of the men are still unknown as of March 2002. And that's 20 years, but there's not much change now. The government perception that religious and political organizations by the Montagnards pose a threat to national unity has been fueled by the link between some advocates of independence in the Highlands and former members of the pro-U.S. Montagnard resistance army that effectively died in 1992. That army was known as Full Road. Some former Full Road members, led by a U.S.-based Jari American named Kokwansa Sora, have been among those accused by the Vietnamese Communist Party of organizing a February 2001 demonstration. Okay. During the third week of December 2001, dozens of minority house church leaders were rounded up and detained throughout the Central Highlands to prevent them from conducting Christmas services. Authorities disrupted dozens of church services in all four provinces of Central Highlands. Milan church leaders summed up the atmosphere in a note smuggled out of the Central Highlands at the end of February 2002, which said, now the authorities have sent soldiers to various villages. They forbid Christians to meet for worship or to read the Bible or to pray before eating or sing Christian songs. They forbid anything to do with Christianity. They are sowing confusion, suspicion, and fear among the people. An organization, Save the Montagnard People, New Central Highlands. It is a nonprofit charity founded by Vietnam veterans in 1986. Many were U.S. Army Special Forces soldiers, as Green Berets, who lived and led the Montagnard Hill people against the communists during the Vietnam War. Other members fought with Cambodian Cham, Vietnamese, Chinese Nung, and other Hmong Hill tribe. I know a friend of mine, before he passed away, Paul Campbell, loved the Montagnard people, took a leave of absence for the jobs to help them out. They're good people, and they're struggling here as well as over in Vietnam. So keep them in your thoughts during this period of time. Now, the Lessons of Vietnam show. I appreciate everyone's continued support, and we continue to support, and we'll look forward to bringing you new, interesting, and educational and true stories of the Vietnam War and the men and women who fought in Vietnam, the country, not just about the people, but the country. Please don't forget you can rewatch or view an earlier show just by clicking on the on-demand icon and selecting the subject or show you'd like to see. Know someone who would like to know more about the Vietnam War? Remember to suggest Lessons of Vietnam. That is me in Extreme, and down in the stream, they're getting ready to fill up my canteens up. We are always looking for guests to tell their story, and I always have people say, you don't want my story. Well, listen, we're looking for people who are SH hashmark burners. That was supposed to be PO. That was supposed to be Medal of Honor recipients. Can't type either. Cooks, war protesters, family members, POWs, RIMP. If you're not a Vietnam vet, find one and ask them what RIMP means. All branches of service, MP, supply, or any other thing affected by the Vietnam War. That's what we want to cover everybody. Not just the combat soldiers who have a CIB. We want to cover everybody because it wasn't for the cooks, the medics that couldn't eat. It wouldn't have the bullets. It wasn't for the supply people. So it was all a joint effort. Our next show is the 10th of January in 2022. And we look forward to being you there. And Merry Christmas to you and your family. Merry Christmas to all the white bearded old non-vets out there. Please take a moment during your celebration of Christmas to say a prayer for our young men and women who missed Christmas with their families because they are protecting us and our families. They can't be home with their loved ones because they're making it safe for us to be home with our loved ones. It's not just the ones that are deployed. There's a lot of military in the United States that have the same problem who cannot get home for whatever reason with their families. So please take the time during your Christmas celebrations to remind them and think about them. Thank you for tuning in for our show. We're looking forward to bigger and better next year, 2002. Thank you, Amnon, for all you've done this year, keeping me straight, which is hard to do. I can't spell and I can't talk half the time. But we're getting it done. And thank all of you out there. Again, thank you for joining in.
Tell everybody about the 19th.
Oh, yes. If you're in the Triangle area on December 19th, North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Incorporated, who basically started the Lessons of Vietnam course in the schools, they will be doing their annual candlelight service on the North Carolina State Capitol ground at the Vietnam Memorial. It'll be at 6 o'clock. It's a very moving ceremony, and I highly recommend that you come. Be there at 6 o'clock, or you won't get a candle to light. So be there by 6 o'clock and get your candle, and we'll be calling out the names as we always do. We'd love to have you there, rain, sleet, snow, whatever, we will be there. And we'll be looking for you. I'm going to look for you personally. I know who you are now out there in the audience, so we'll look for you. Again, be sure and come. It is really a great ceremony. Amnon, I appreciate all you've done. And you want to tell people something?
Thank you.
Well, listen, without you, there ain't no me. And without the people out there, there's neither one of us. So y'all have a good one. Bye.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.